So now that we've talked about how we use language and some of the functions of language, let's talk about some of the elements of language that are going to impact how our audience experiences our speech. The first element is clarity. So we want to make sure that we are using language that our audience is going to understand and that our message is as clear to them as it possibly can be. That the message that we are sending as speakers is the message that gets to our audience's ears, that they understand it in the way that we intended. And we do this by making sure that our audience understands our meaning, that we have the same connotations for words. We do this by using words that have fewer syllables rather than using words that have more syllables. We do this in a number of different ways. And using clear language can make a big difference in how well a message is understood by an audience. We also want to make sure that we are using word economy, or only using the words that are necessary to accurately express our ideas. Now, we don't want to go too far on the scale and go too basic, because then our audience is going to feel like we're talking down to them. But we also don't want to use so many words that we are kind of going around in circles. So we want to find that middle ground, right? That Goldilocks state where we're using just the right amount of words so that we are completely understood by our audience, but that we aren't repeating ourselves too frequently. We also want to avoid using obscenity or indecent language, such as curse words. And for the most part, right, this is because it helps our credibility as a speaker. If we are up there and we're just kind of cussing to ourselves the entire speech, that isn't going to help create goodwill in the minds of our audience very well. So, typically, we don't recommend using obscene language in a speech unless your speech is about the origins of obscene language or something like that. But if you're going to do something like that, you have to talk to me first. We also want to make sure that we are avoiding the use of obscure language or jargon. And again, jargon is that language that is very specific to a topic area. So if we are using this jargon, we want to make sure that we are defining it for our audience so that they understand what we're talking about, right? Going back to the idea of clarity. So if we're using more obscure language, if we're using jargon, we always want to make sure that we define those terms for our audience. And another part of this sort of jargon includes the use of acronyms and initialisms. Now, these acronyms and initialisms are collections of letters that stand for something else, like a phrase or a group or like a department, something like that. And we use those letters to either form words for acronyms, or we just group those letters together and pronounce them each individually to create an initialism. So an example of an acronym is SCUBA. For example, if you're going scuba diving, the letters SCUBA, SCUBA, stand for Self-Contained Underwater Breathing Apparatus. That's an acronym because it creates a word. Whereas an initialism doesn't create a word. So for example, if you say the NFL or the National Football League, right? That's an initialism because you are pronouncing each letter. Or I could say the Federal Bureau of Investigations or the FBI, right? Those are initialisms. The trick with acronyms and initialisms is that you always want to make sure that you define those acronyms and initialisms before you proceed in the speech. For example, I have a student who is writing a speech right now about homeless women needing access to feminine hygiene products, and she mentions in her speech toxic shock syndrome. And this syndrome is better known as TSS, but she doesn't just refer to it as TSS throughout the speech. She begins at the very top of her speech when she first introduces the idea of toxic shock syndrome. She says that doing X, Y, and Z can often lead to toxic shock syndrome or TSS, right? So she defines that term. She says the phrase out loud first, toxic shock syndrome, and then she says or TSS to cue her audience into the fact that she is going to be referring to this syndrome as TSS for the rest of the speech. So if you're going to use acronyms or initialisms, always make sure that you say the full phrase first, refer to the acronym or initialism that you'll be using, and then continue to use that acronym or initialism. Another element of language is the power that's behind language. So power is an individual's ability to influence another person to think or behave in a specific manner that they wouldn't do otherwise. And we, generally speaking, want to avoid the use of powerless language in public speaking because, especially if we are persuasively speaking, we want power in our language, right? We want our audience to do something that they wouldn't have otherwise done. So using language such as best as I was able to find out, or I'm not really an expert on this topic, using that sort of powerless language isn't going to help you in any way, shape, or form when it comes to your credibility in front of your audience and your ability to get them to do something that they wouldn't have otherwise done. So we always want to use powerful language. And for examples of powerful and powerless language, take a look at your textbook. They have a great table in there that demonstrates the difference between powerful and powerless language. And finally, we want to use a wide variety of language. Right? So we want to make sure that we use and implement a wide range of language choices, because if we start using the same language device all the time in our speeches, our audience is going to get bored with it and we're going to become predictable as speakers. So we want to always toss something new in just to keep our audience on our toes and to keep things fresh for us as speakers as well.